Hey folks, this is Jesse Cope, back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well, as always, wherever y'all are and whatever part of the day you're in. I appreciate y'all joining me, giving me a little bit of your time each day. And for those of y'all that continue to share the podcast with others, tell people about it, spread the word. I'm very grateful, humbled by it. Hopefully y'all get something out of it, and whoever you share it with does too, and hopefully our country just a little bit. I'm going to take one of our little walks. I have one dog kind of thinking about strolling out. It's hard, It's a rough decision. And that's about it. Have, lots of things to do today, as I'm sure y'all do as well. So I'll go ahead and get going. We're going to talk for a little bit about the Ten Commandments. So I really had intended to do this opposite, but it may work better to start from where I thought I was going to end. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll see how this goes. So in 1980, Supreme Court case, Stone versus Graham, the result was that the Ten Commandments had to be removed from view in any school. And that, of course, that court case in 1980 spawned from the court case back in 1947 of Everson versus Board of Education, where they took Jefferson's phrase of wall of separation between church and state. And so they took something that was not in the Declaration or the Constitution, that had been it had been the opposite case since the inception of our country. And they took this phrase in a private letter from Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Church. They completely ignored the rest of the letter, the meaning, because the real meaning, right, is Jefferson was saying the state is not going to come in. He was comforting this Baptist pastor's concerns. The state's not going to come in and say everybody has to be Catholic. Everybody has to be Methodist. The state was not going to set up a state religion as they had dealt with in Britain and as so many others had dealt with across the world. He was absolutely not saying that Christian faith could not or should not influence the policy of the country. And we've talked about this a number of times, and we'll go back to that court case and talk about it some more in that particular letter. But that is what spawned this removal of the Ten Commandments from schools. Because up until that point, you talk to your parents or your grandparents, the Ten Commandments were somewhere in just about every school across the nation. It was something that students saw on a regular basis. It was something that they were taught, and it was part of their life as school children. And the follow-on argument there, or the associated one, is that it really was talked about in families. And I don't know for y'all. I know for myself this is condemning, because how often do I talk about this with my own children? It's certainly not something that they daily see in my own house. And it's just always important to note that, folks. We always talk about Adam's quote and others, but if we want our country fixed, we have to start with ourselves. But before I get too far off track, so the Ten Commandments absolutely should be in every single school across the country. No doubt. Every classroom ought to be something that students see every day and is talked about along with the teachings of Christ frequently. That ought to be the basis, the core. Before arts and sciences and math and anything else, that core, it all has to be based on these moral teachings of Jesus Christ. And our founders, completely contrary to what you hear in the media today and from the left in general, believe this. They believe that you had to have this firm foundation on the teachings of Christ and this moral law. And the Declaration, and we've talked about this before too with Blackstone. Blackstone was a lawyer commentator. He wrote the commentaries on English law, I believe is the title. And as we see in the Declaration of Independence, the phrase, the laws of nature and of nature's God, right? What does that refer to? That refers specifically to God the Father of Jesus Christ the Son. It refers to Christianity. And these laws of nature and this law of nature's God refers to the will of God. And so, well, how do you see that? Well, you have to start with what the moral teachings of God are. And where do you get that? You get that from the Ten Commandments. That's where God laid out in the Old Testament the simplest basis for moral law, for God's will and how we should interact with one another. And so I'm going to read just a few quotes, excuse me, about what some of our founders, what their comments were. So you get an idea of just how far off course we've gone. And also, as we talk about, so that you have this in the back of your head when somebody tries to come up and say this is not a Christian republic. This was not founded on the basis of God and Jesus Christ, which is absolute nonsense. So John Jay, who we talked about recently, we talk about often, the very first Supreme Court Chief Justice, these are a couple of his comments on talking about the moral or the natural law, which again, very clearly in our founders' era goes back directly to God the Father of Jesus Christ. It doesn't go to Islam. It doesn't go to Buddhism or Hinduism or atheism or Mother Nature or just general deism. It specifically is referring to God the Father of Jesus Christ, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is John Jay. The moral or natural law was given by the sovereign of the universe to all mankind. With them, it was coeval, existing at the same time as man. And with them, it will be coexistent, lasting as long as man lasts. Being founded by infinite wisdom and goodness on essential right, which never varies, it can require no amendment or alterations. So he's saying God gave us this. It's perfect. It's the basis for all moral or natural law. We don't need to add anything to it. Here it is. The gospel, talking about the New Testament here, this is John Jay again, referring directly to the New Testament, not only recognizes the whole moral law and extends and perfects our knowledge of it, but also enjoins on all mankind the observance of it. Being ordained by a legislator, capital L there, of infinite wisdom and rectitude, and in whom there is no variableness, James 1:17. It must be free from imperfection, and therefore never has, nor ever will require amendment or alteration. Hence, I conclude that the moral law is exactly the same now that it was before the flood. Just a little side note here. I'm pulling today. A lot of this stuff is from Founders Bible and Patriots Bible. You can find it in a number of other sources, but those are the two that I'm using. And I may have pulled something out of, some of this may come from America's God Encyclopedia at any rate. So in the second one, John Jay is saying we have an obligation to to follow these teachings of Christ, which are based on the moral law handed down by God, the Ten Commandments. So we have an obligation, all mankind does, to follow these precepts. It's interesting here, regardless of if you're Christian or not, all mankind. So we talk often about how the fact that you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to follow Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior in order to be an American, because freedom of religion. But our founders knew that if we were going to function correctly, we had to follow these principles, regardless of what we claim. For our republic to be functional, we had to follow these principles laid out by Jesus Christ, based on the Ten Commandments, the moral law. I'm going to read a little excerpt. This is from Barton, the editor for the Founders Bible. The moral law of the scriptures as set forth by God himself became the basis of what the Western world, or Christendom, called the common law, which was incorporated into the U.S. Constitution in the Seventh Amendment. Historically, the Ten Commandments have always been viewed as the embodiment of the moral law. As signer of the Declaration, John Witherspoon affirmed, "The Ten Commandments are the sum of the moral law." So, a couple other founders, Noah Webster. The moral law is summarily contained in the Decalogue, or Ten Commandments, written by the finger of God on 2 tablets of stone and delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania. Vain indeed would be the search among the writings of profane antiquity, secular history, to find so broad, so complete, and so solid a basis for morality as this Decalogue, 10 Commandments, lays down. Noah Webster again, the moral principles and precepts contained in the scriptures ought to form the basis of all our civil constitutions and laws. So between John Jay and Noah Webster there, not only do we have a responsibility, all mankind, to follow these precepts, this moral law as laid out in the Ten Commandments. As a country, as a republic, the basis for all of our civil institutions, political institutions, ought to be these Ten Commandments, this moral law given by God and expounded on, clarified in the New Testament by Jesus Christ. All goes back to this. And then I want to read this last little part. It's not little, but this is by Chief Justice William Rehnquist of the U.S. Supreme Court. We need only to look within our own courtroom. Since 1935, Moses has stood holding 2 tablets that reveal portions of the Ten Commandments, written in Hebrew, among other lawgivers in the South Breeze. Representations of the Ten Commandments adorn the metal gates lining the north and south sides of the courtroom, as well as the doors leading into the courtroom. Moses also sits on the exterior east facade of the building, holding the Ten Commandments tablets. Similar acknowledgments can be seen throughout a visitor's tour of our nation's capital. For example, a large statue of Moses holding the Ten Commandments alongside a statue of the Apostle Paul has overlooked the rotunda of the Library of Congress's Jefferson Building since 1897. And the Jefferson Building's great reading room contains a sculpture of a woman beside the Ten Commandments with a quote above her from the Old Testament, Micah 6:8. A medallion with 2 tablets depicting the Ten Commandments decorates the floor of the National Archives. Inside the Department of Justice, a statue entitled The Spirit of Law has 2 tablets representing the Ten Commandments lying at its feet. In front of the Ronald Reagan Building is another sculpture that includes a depiction of the Ten Commandments. So too, a 24-foot tall sculpture depicting, among other things, the Ten Commandments and a cross stands outside the federal courthouse that houses both the Court of Appeals and the District Court for the District of Columbia. Moses is also prominently featured in the chamber of the United States House of Representatives. So how does this all tie together? As bright as y'all are, despite the fact that you listen to my podcast each day, Y'all probably have already gotten there. Our whole system of government, our country, our families more importantly than that, and our marriages more importantly than that, go back to God the Father and Jesus Christ. Those were the core values that held our country together. Our founders believed this. Their own commentary backs this up. This moral law based on these 10 commandments all goes back to that. Everything. And it's something, if you know, and I don't have this verse pulled right in front of me, there's a couple things that have gone through my head today that I should have pulled and I didn't. But there's a verse in the Old Testament talking about these moral rules from God should be something that we talk about each day, have on our hearts, have on our minds, teach our children, write them on the posts of our door, talking about our buildings. We ought to have these in all of our schoolhouses that are publicly funded. We talk about this so often. If you're going to have public school, which we need, you have to base that public school on the foundations that support and strengthen our country. The 10 Commandments ought to be the core or part of the core of public education. It ought to be something the students see on the building every day. It ought to be something that's talked about frequently. You can build research and education and science and art and math and every other field, history, education itself. You can build that on a moral foundation, but you can't build a moral foundation on the education of those other subjects. Just like a house, you can build a house on a strong foundation, but you can't build a strong foundation under the house after you've already got it built. Not to mention the fact that the house won't be strong to begin with if there's no foundation there. And yet, what have we done over the last 80 years since 1947? We have rejected God out of our country and out of our education, and in particular, these 10 commandments we've taken away. And then we want to know why violence is so rampant. We want to know why mental disorders are so rampant and illness. We want to know why marriages are falling apart. We want to know why our kids are falling apart. This is why. And so we talked about this the other day, folks, there's no economic solution here that doesn't first include the moral teachings of God and Jesus Christ. If, as a country, regardless of what happens, we got a civil war coming, regardless of who's president, who the representative or senator is, as citizens, if our first goal isn't the moral law here, the moral side of this, the social side of this, then it doesn't matter what else we do. It's not going to fix it. It's like what we just read recently. We're just going to exchange, I think from John Adams, right? We're just going to exchange tyrants and tyrannies. We have got to get the 10 Commandments back in the center of our public education and the center of our lives as a country, back at the heart of our families. All right. I'm going to leave y'all alone for today. I'm sure y'all have other things to do. I appreciate y'all giving me a little bit of your time. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. Sure do enjoy it, folks. Thank y'all for joining me. We'll talk to y'all again real soon.